This is Tom Fox. I'm the Compliance Evangelist, and I'd like to welcome you to the November series of 1 month to a more effective compliance program series that I'm running in 2017. This month, we're going to take a look at 1 month of 360 degrees of communication in compliance. This month's sponsor is Dun & Bradstreet. The only thing that is constant right now in the regulatory environment is change. Supply chain leaders and compliance professionals alike continue to struggle with how to best adequately identify, screen, and gain visibility into ownership structures of third parties and or customers so that they understand exactly who they are doing business with. Companies can knowingly finance goods that are potentially obtained illegally or sold on the black market. Procurement teams that are unaware of third-party activities and have antiquated systems, they put their company at risk. Without proper visibility, these teams could unknowingly be funding terrorism or even engaging in human trafficking. In-depth research is needed to identify ultimate beneficial owners and third-party risks. No business ties to corrupt practices such as human trafficking or money laundering is going to self-report, so companies must take this work on themselves and obtain third-party data needed to determine risk, mitigate exposure, and protect their brand and comply with regulations. Dun & Bradstreet offers an end-to-end comprehensive solution to help organizations tackle this exact complexity. Leverage Dun & Bradstreet's complete due diligence reporting to know your vendor and your third-party partners. Do not expose yourself to undue risk. Contact Dun & Bradstreet today to learn more about vendor onboarding, supply risk management, and comprehensive compliance check. This month I'm going to tackle the concept of 360 degrees of communication and compliance. We're going to take a look at it from a variety of ways and mechanisms. We're going to consider the Chief Compliance Officer and his or her role in communications. We're going to take a look at how you can facilitate a two-way conversation of communications while sitting in the CCO suite. We're going to consider some of the leadership and other components of a CCO's role and how they will help you have a more robust and indeed holistic approach to compliance. We're going to consider the bottom-up approach to communications by utilizing communications techniques for your employees, third parties, contractors, and those that may come into contractual relationship with your company through the supply chain. We're going to consider 360 degrees of communications through operationalization of compliance and culture. It's going to be a very interesting month. I think as a CCO you will learn quite a bit, and at the end of the month you will not only have information which will allow you to be a more well-rounded CCO, but bring a much more holistic approach to your compliance function. My year-long series of 1 month to a more effective compliance program and the November edition of 1 month of 360 degrees of communication and compliance are a part of the Compliance Podcast Network. Day 13, asking questions to boost your compliance program. Other than the skill of listening, asking questions is about as important to the compliance practitioner as any other skill that can be employed. Yet, equally critical is to ask the right question, which was explored by Brian Glazer and Charles Fishman in their book, From a Curious Mind, The Secret to a Bigger Life. Glazer is a well-known and successful Hollywood director who has directed such movies as Splash, A Beautiful Mind, and Cinderella Man. He believes that much of the success he has achieved is because he asks a lot of questions. Indeed, questions are a great management tool, he asserts. This is because asking questions elicits information, and it also creates the space for people to raise issues that they are worried about and that a boss, colleague, or other may not know about. By asking questions, you allow people to tell a different story than the one you're expecting. Finally, and perhaps most significantly, asking questions means people having to make their case for the way they want a decision to go. Getting your employees to simply not talk, but rather tell you the truth about how they feel or what they may be thinking is a key for any leader. As a CCO, you may find this particularly difficult in the far-flung reaches of an international company, which is subject to the FCPA, the UK Bribery Act, or any other anti-bribery, anti-corruption law. Whether you are performing a risk assessment or simply getting out of the corporate home office, you need to be able to engage employees across the globe from a variety of culture, asking open-ended questions so you will not receive a simple yes-no feedback. Some key foundational questions include, what are you focused on? Why are you focused on that? What are you worried about? What is your plan? By asking these and other such questions, such as what are you hoping for, what are you expecting, and what's the most important part of this for you, a CCO can get much more engagement from people with whom you work. Consider the pursuit of a high-profit deal in a high-risk geographic area. You may want to sit down with the business unit person in charge and ask them, what is your plan to sign this contract, execute it, consistent with your obligations with the company's compliance program? In doing so, you are communicating two key concepts using a 360-degree approach of communications. First, you are making clear that there should be a plan in place. Second, you are making it clear the employee is in charge of the plan. Yet by asking the question, you are communicating that the employee has both the responsibility for the problem and the authority to come up with a solution. This type of approach allows those who do so desire to step up, as it's a simply human quality, or it's rather simple quality of human nature, that people prefer to choose to do things rather than be ordered to do so. Equally important are the values that can be transmitted by asking questions. If you have to fly to China or some other local office, you do not want to be seen as a U.S. corporate executive coming to deliver some bad news or that costs need to be cut. By asking questions, you can solicit ideas to help solve these problems. This is because by asking questions, it creates the authority in people to come up with the ideas coupled with the responsibility for moving things forward. Questions create space for all kinds of ideas, and the sparks come up with those ideas. Most important, the questions they're sending have a very clear message. We're willing to listen, even to ideas or suggestions or problems that we weren't expecting. This is not about being warm or fuzzy. It is about demonstrating curiosity in employees. You should also remember asking questions in the context of 360 degrees of communication. Louis Sapperman has made clear that this concept is simply more than a two-way up or down approach. It really demonstrates not only a level of knowledge, but that communication itself is important in every other direction in the workplace. People should ask their bosses questions. If employees feel comfortable enough to ask these questions, it allows the CCO to be clear about things they think are clear, but more importantly, things that they think may not be clear. Finally, if a person asks a question, they must usually listen to the answer. This is because people are more likely to consider a piece of advice or flat-out instruction if you've asked in the first place. You too can use this simple and straightforward technique to improve not only your leadership qualities in the compliance function, but also your organizational compliance functions as well. The reason is that by asking questions, it is much better than simply giving orders, that you have a vastly talented workforce that you can tap into that will help you do business in compliance. But the how of doing a business process that is, or should be, burned into your company can be facilitated by the possibilities that are out there in employees' minds. You just have to find a way to tap into it. 360 degrees of communications allows you to create an atmosphere where no one is afraid to ask a question. Perhaps equally importantly, no one is afraid to answer a question. And if you think about that in the terms of your hotline and or your reporting, if you can just get employees to raise their hands and ask a question, that's a critical function. And finally, for the compliance practitioner, it's one thing to be a subject matter expert, and many compliance practitioners are, but someone has to tap into that subject matter expertise for it to be of use. So if you can get employees to ask you questions, if you can develop a personal relationship with them so that they will ask you questions, it will facilitate the operationalization of your compliance program and actually burn the compliance program into the DNA of your company. So what are today's 3 key takeaways? Well, let's start with the most basic, which is asking questions is a great technique to elicit information. It engages the listener, makes them actively participate in the process, but also may make them the owner of that process. And when you can do that at the cost of simply asking a question, I think you've really come on to something. 2, asking questions creates the authority in people to come up with ideas, coupled with the responsibility for moving forward. And that can be a very, very powerful tool for you, the responsibility of moving things forward. They have now taken ownership of it and working at it, and you have assigned this to them, and they will probably do their best to make it work. And finally, number 3, you must create an atmosphere where no employee is afraid to ask or answer a question. Equally are important in the 360 degrees of communication. Remember, it's not only ask, but also answer a question. This is Tom Fox. I hope you've enjoyed day 13, and I hope you'll join me tomorrow for day 14 of 1 month to 360 degrees of communication in compliance. Hello, everyone. This is Tom Fox, and I'd like to thank you for listening to this episode of 1 month to 360 days of communication and compliance. If you have listened to this podcast on iTunes, I would greatly appreciate it if you would rate our podcast, as it would help in our rankings and also help get the word out about the only daily compliance podcast involving the nuts and bolts of compliance. Also, if you have any questions, please feel free to email me at tfox@tfoxlaw.com. Finally, I'd like to thank our sponsor for this month, Dun & Bradstreet. I hope you will join me tomorrow for another episode. The podcast series in November, 1 month to 360 degrees of communication, is a part of the Compliance Podcast Network.